Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is Pulse. I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be learning how to read. Now, of course, I don't mean read in the literal sense. I mean, how do we get consistent with reading as a habit? Now, if you're someone like me, you may have been on self-improvement for a bit now. For example, I started going gym and was on self-improvement, but at the beginning of my self-improvement journey, I wanted to get into reading, but I couldn't. You may be in a similar situation where you like the idea of reading, but it doesn't click, and you may even have bought books, but whenever you get down and actually read, you get bored immediately, or you just can't keep consistent with it. And there's three main reasons that most people nowadays can't even read. I don't mean literally again, but most people nowadays can't even read a paragraph. And there's three main reasons for this, which I'm going to get into, and how can we correct it. The first reason that people find it hard to read consistently is because of short attention spans. Now, with the rise of apps like TikTok, short form content is more common than ever. And what short form content is basically is these short videos with lots of dopamine effects and stuff to catch your attention. Now, obviously, why do apps do this? To sort of hook you on the app, to basically makes the app more addicting and keeps your attention longer. And what that in turn does is that now your mind gets used to that, so then your mind needs more stuff to stimulate it for attention. That's why, for example, in modern short form content, it's short, it's snappy, and it's got all these effects to stimulate your mind to keep focused. And that has a huge harm, because basically what that means is, you think about it, if your mind is getting bare stimulated just to focus, if there's no stimulation, your mind is just going to start racing, going to start flooding with thoughts. And that's what happens nowadays with reading. Nowadays, if a modern person goes to read a paragraph, they can't even read a paragraph without their mind flooding with thoughts and without them getting distracted. And if you ask them to read the entire paragraph, then ask them what it's about, they probably wouldn't even be able to tell you. The second point sort of links with that, and that is mindfulness. Most people nowadays don't practice mindfulness at all. Most people aren't even aware what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is the sort of art of being present, which is so rare to come by, because of TikTok, stuff like that has ruined people's attention spans. And also, people's minds just always race with thoughts, whether that's because of anxiety, they're overthinking something, they're just bored, they're not, because their mind's not being stimulated, so they're obviously going to be bored, and then their mind is going to try think of stuff to almost entertain itself. But what mindfulness means is basically being present, and a great way to improve mindfulness is meditation. But because most people obviously aren't mindful, what that in turn does for reading is, when you're reading, your mind is in different places, so you can't even concentrate when you're reading. And in turn, that's going to make it a lot harder for you to actually be able to read consistently, because if you're just reading, but you're passive reading in a way, so you're not even concentrating on the book, and you're not really paying attention. Especially if you're on self-improvement like me, if you're reading a self-improvement book or reading a book to learn, you want to actually be learning, so it's going to be much harder if your mind is in different places. And especially if you're reading for joy as well, or trying to read for joy, it's going to be a lot harder if your mind is thinking of a lot of different things. That's why mindfulness is obviously important. And the final reason is school. School is probably the main reason that most people dislike reading. Most people can agree as well that school makes reading very daunting in a way, and stressful, because what school does is it makes you sort of read books you don't want to read, which in turn is obviously going to make you less interested. But even when it is somewhat interesting books, they make you overanalyze it, and because you're obviously with school, most of the time when you're reading a book, you either do an exam on it, or you do a case study for it, or an essay about it. So that takes away all of the fun of reading, basically, because what you're doing, instead of actually reading for the sake of reading, you're reading to sort of like overanalyze like a section of it all to be tested upon. So it adds like that stress factor as well. So obviously that's very harmful if you actually want to learn how to read. So how can we fix this? There's 3 main solutions, and each solution is linked to each problem. And the first solution is a dopamine detox. This is very, very beneficial. You shouldn't just do it for reading, you should just, in general, I would highly recommend it, because most of this generation is so like hyper stimulated and have short attention spans. So it's so beneficial to go on a dopamine detox. If you don't know what a dopamine detox is, it's basically where you go for a long period of time without all these dopamine inducing activities, which include like video games, going on the internet, especially stuff like TikTok and short form content, because they really are harmful, but stuff like video games, and basically cutting out all these bad habits, even stuff like junk food and like masturbation as well, and cutting it all out and then replacing all the bad habits with good habits such as reading, which is what the video is about, meditation, going gym, and like, you know, focusing on your career, doing financial stuff, journaling, doing all these good habits. And that's what a dopamine detox is, and it's very beneficial, not just to learn how to read properly, but just in general. Most people, I would argue, nowadays need to go on a dopamine detox, because we're so hyper-stimulated because of all these modern, like, sort of comforts, and it's so easy nowadays to become addicted to, like, the apps and become so hyper-stimulated. Now, the second solution is meditation. Now, meditation is probably the simplest solution on this sort of list or whatever. Well, actually, the third one is also pretty simple, but meditation is really simple. All you really have to do is 5 minutes a day, do a meditation. You can either do it in the morning or before bed, or both, ideally. I usually do it before bed. Before bed is also very beneficial. Before bed is most beneficial for like sleep, whereas if you do it in the morning, it's probably better for mindfulness, which is what we actually are aiming for, mindfulness. And what meditation does is you're basically practicing to be present. So when you're meditating, you're obviously like focusing on your breath, and that it's almost like, yeah, like Hamza said, it's almost like a workout for your mind. Imagine like every time you're losing your focus and going back to your breath, think of that as a rep, and each time your mind is getting stronger. So what you're basically doing when you're meditating is you're focusing on your breath, only your attention on your breath. Your mind will wander, and obviously you will have thoughts, but whenever you have thoughts, you just go back to your breath, and each time think of it as like your mind getting stronger. Over time, this helps be mindful. And if you are like how I used to be, for example, before 2023, I sort of wanted to get into meditation, and well, I was sort of into reading, but not as much. But I wanted to get into meditation, but I found the idea silly. And you may be like that, you may think meditation is silly, and I also thought it was effort for some reason, but it really is just as simple as taking 5 minutes out of your day, specific, like, and just be consistent with it. Don't like pussy out, actually do it. And it's just 5 minutes. You can even, to make it even easier, you can do a guided meditation. All you have to do is 5 minutes. If you want, you can do 10 minutes, but honestly, all you have to do is 5 minutes of meditation a day, and it helps practice mindfulness, and in turn that will just help you be present, and then that will help in turn make reading more enjoyable. But those two things I just mentioned, dopamine detox and meditation, don't just do it just so you can be able to read. Just in general, those are good habits you should be like not only doing right now, but should just be doing in general for life. Now, our final solution is probably going to be the most practical for reading, because this is actually how we sort of get the habit into dedicating a time slot and reading. So like I said, the third problem was how school sort of forces us to read and makes it less enjoyable. So how do we counteract this? So what we do is we usually dedicate a specific time slot for reading. Now, ideally, you should either do this in the morning before you go on like your phone and stuff. So, ideally do it in the morning when you're like having a cup of tea, cup of coffee, or what I like to do is do it in an evening when you're like cozy, warm, and about to go to sleep, and make it enjoyable. So what you should do is like have a cup of tea, you know, get a blanket, be comfy, and make it enjoyable. And read books you actually enjoy, because you're not in school anymore. You can read whatever you want, read what you find interesting, and it doesn't matter if you have to read a bunch of books before you find the one book you actually find interesting. Read how many books you have to before you find a book you enjoy a lot, and then read that book until you finish it, and make it enjoyable for yourself. And it is just important to read outside of school. Even if you want to read like books for school, it's important to read books apart from the books for school, because in your mind, if you link books to school, it's already just going to make it harder for you to read in general. But yeah, that's like the best tip from me, is sort of make it enjoyable. Read a bunch of books until you find a book that you enjoy the most, and get cozy, have a cup of tea, stuff like that. Anyway, wish you the best of luck. From now, safe from me.